The year was 2347, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Concord for nearly 100 years. During that time, humans had built a reputation for themselves. They were known as the peacemakers, the diplomats, the species that always chose words over weapons. Other alien races often joked that humans would try to negotiate with a supernova if they could. It was meant as an insult, but humans took it as a compliment. Ambassador Daniel Cooper had spent 30 years of his life building bridges between species. He had helped end 3 interstellar conflicts without a single shot being fired. He believed, truly believed, that any problem could be solved if people just sat down and talked. When the Empire first appeared at the edge of known space, Daniel was the first to extend a hand of friendship. They were different from other species. They were tall, almost 8 feet, with skin and 4 arms. Their eyes were completely black, showing no emotion. They spoke in a language that sounded like grinding metal, and their ships looked like floating fortresses covered in weapons. Most species avoided them, but Daniel saw an opportunity. He saw a chance to bring peace to a warrior race. He was wrong. The human colony on Meridian 7 was one of the most beautiful places in the galaxy. 12 million people called it home. There were farmers who grew crops in the rich purple soil. There were teachers who educated children in schools built from local stone. There were artists who painted the 3 moons that hung in the orange sky. Families had been living there for 4 generations, building something wonderful on a world far from Earth. Commander Lisa Grant was stationed at the orbital defense platform above Meridian 7. She was 42 years old, a career military officer who had never fired a weapon in anger. Her job was mostly paperwork and routine patrols. The biggest excitement she had experienced in 10 years was a meteor that came too close to the colony. At exactly 3:47 hours, everything changed. The distress signal came through so suddenly that Lisa almost spilled her coffee. The screens lit up with red warnings. Sensors showed 200 warships dropping out of hyperspace, surrounding the planet like a net closing around a fish. Lisa's hands shook as she tried to send a message to Earth. The communication systems were already jammed. She watched helplessly as the ships descended on the colony below. Bright beams of energy cut through the atmosphere, striking cities, farms, schools. The night side of the planet lit up with fire. Lisa could see the explosions from orbit, each one representing thousands of lives being snuffed out in an instant. The attack lasted 16 hours. Lisa stayed at her post the entire time, recording everything, crying silently as she watched her world burn. When they finally left, they did not even acknowledge the tiny defense platform floating above the devastation. To them, it was beneath their notice. By the time the rescue ships arrived from Earth, there was nothing left to rescue. The cities were craters. The farms were ash. The schools were rubble. 12 million people had been alive when Lisa started her shift. Now there were only 47 survivors, all of them children, all of them found huddled in a deep underground shelter that they had somehow missed. Admiral Porter was 63 years old. He had hair, a face full of wrinkles, and eyes that had seen too much. He had fought in the border wars 40 years ago, the last real conflict humanity had faced. He had hoped he would never see another war in his lifetime. Standing before the United Earth Council, holding the reports from Meridian 7, he knew that hope was dead. The council chamber was filled with representatives from every nation on Earth. Presidents, prime ministers, generals, scientists. They all stared at the holographic images floating in the center of the room. Images of burned buildings and empty streets. Images of toys scattered among the ruins. Images of silence where there should have been laughter. Admiral Porter cleared his throat. His voice was rough when he spoke. The attack was not random. It was not a military action against a strategic target. Meridian 7 had no weapons, no military value whatsoever. This was a message. President Maria Santos sat at the head of the table. She was 55 years old, a former lawyer who had risen to lead the United Earth government. She had campaigned on a platform of peace and cooperation. Now she was looking at the death of 12 million of her people. "What kind of message?" she asked. "They left survivors," Admiral Porter said quietly. 47 children. They wanted witnesses. They wanted someone to tell us what happened." A murmur ran through the chamber. Some representatives looked sick. Others looked angry. A few were crying openly. "We have received a transmission from the Emperor," Porter continued. "His name is Al. He has sent his terms." The holographic display changed, showing the alien Emperor. He was massive, even by standards, with scars covering his skin. His 4 arms were crossed over his chest, and his black eyes stared out at the council with something that might have been amusement. "Humans," the recording began, the translation software giving it a cold, mechanical voice. "You have spread across the stars like a disease. You talk of peace while building colonies on worlds that do not belong to you. You speak of friendship while making alliances against us. This ends now." The Emperor leaned forward, his face filling the display. "You will withdraw from the Galactic Concord. You will abandon your colonies outside your home system. You will kneel before the Empire, or what happened to Meridian 7 will happen to Earth itself." The recording ended. Silence filled the chamber. President Santos stood slowly. Her hands were gripping the edge of her desk so hard that her knuckles had turned white. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but there was something underneath it, something cold and hard. "For 100 years we have shown the galaxy our best face. We have been patient. We have been kind. We have been forgiving. We believed that any conflict could be resolved through understanding." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. "They have shown us that some species do not want understanding. They want dominance. They want fear. They wanted to see what humans look like when they are broken." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of 12 million ghosts. "Convene the War Council. Every nation, every fleet commander, every military strategist we have. Call back our retired officers. Reopen the old weapon factories. They wanted to see what humans do when they are pushed too far." President Santos walked to the window and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, they were waiting, confident in their victory. "Now we stop being civil." The news of Meridian 7 spread across Earth like wildfire. Within hours, every person on the planet knew what had happened. They saw the images of the destroyed cities. They heard the testimonies of the 47 children who had survived. They watched the Emperor's message, his demands for humanity to kneel. And something changed. For generations, humans had learned to set aside their differences. The old wars, the old hatreds, the old divisions had faded into history. People thought of themselves as one species, united under the banner of peace. But buried deep within that peaceful society was something ancient, something that humanity had worked hard to forget, that had just reminded them what it was. Within 72 hours, Earth transformed. Factories that had been making farming equipment began producing weapons. Research facilities that had been studying medicine switched to developing new shields and armor. Schools converted their gymnasiums into training centers. Retired soldiers, some of them in their 70s and 80s, showed up at recruitment offices asking how they could help. Dr. Price was a physicist who had spent his entire career studying theoretical concepts that most people could not even understand. He worked at the Geneva Research Institute, surrounded by books and computers, living a quiet life of pure science. He had never held a weapon in his life. Now he found himself in an underground bunker, working alongside military engineers who wanted to know how to kill more efficiently. "The shields are remarkable," explained to a room full of officers. He was nervous, not used to speaking to military people, but the importance of what he had discovered pushed him forward. "They operate on something called quantum frequency rotation. Basically, the shield changes its energy signature thousands of times per second. Normal weapons cannot lock onto it because by the time the weapon hits, the shield has already shifted. Admiral Porter sat in the front row, listening carefully. So their shields are invincible. Shook his head. Nothing is invincible. The rotation follows a pattern. It is incredibly complex, but it is still a pattern. If we can analyze it fast enough and predict where it will be, we can design weapons that anticipate the rotation and strike at the exact moment of vulnerability. How fast would we need to analyze it? Another officer asked. Faster than any computer we currently have, admitted. But I have been working on a new processing system. It uses quantum entanglement to perform calculations almost instantaneously. In theory, it could crack the shield pattern in less than a second. In theory, Porter repeated. Met his eyes. Give me 2 weeks and I will make it more than theory. On the other side of Earth, Lieutenant Sophie Adams was preparing for a different kind of work. She was 29 years old, a fighter pilot who had spent most of her career doing routine patrols and escort missions. She had grown up on Meridian 7, had left just 6 months before the attack to take a new posting on Earth. Her entire family was gone. Her parents, her 2 brothers, her grandmother who used to make the best bread in the colony. All of them reduced to ash while Sophie was safe on Earth, complaining about the weather and missing home. She did not cry when she heard the news. She did not scream or break things. She simply walked to the recruitment office and volunteered for the first strike team. The selection process was brutal. Out of 10,000 applicants, only 50 were chosen. They trained 18 hours a day, learning new tactics, new weapons, new ways of fighting that humanity had not used in decades. Sophie excelled at all of it. Her hands were steady, her mind was clear, and her determination was absolute. 2 weeks later, Dr. Price delivered on his promise. The new weapon systems were installed on a prototype fighter, and Sophie was chosen to lead the first test mission. Remember, Admiral Porter's voice came through the communication system as Sophie's squadron approached the target. This is not just a test. Patrol fleet detected 17 ships in this sector. If this works, we take them out. If it does not work, you retreat immediately. We cannot afford to lose pilots on a failed experiment. Sophie checked her instruments. The new targeting system glowed blue on her display, ready to analyze the shields. Understood, Admiral. Beginning approach now. The patrol fleet was waiting for them. 17 warships, each one bristling with weapons that could destroy a human fighter in a single shot. The commander looked at the approaching human squadron and felt nothing but contempt. These primitive creatures thought they could challenge the might of the Empire. They would learn their mistakes soon enough. Sophie's targeting system locked onto the lead ship. Numbers scrolled across her display as the quantum processor analyzed the shield pattern. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The display turned green. Pattern identified. Vulnerability calculated. Sophie fired. The beam of energy shot from her fighter, adjusted its frequency in mid-flight, and struck the shield at the exact moment of rotation. The shield flickered once, then collapsed. A second later, the warship exploded in a ball of fire. The other pilots followed Sophie's lead. 11 minutes later, all 17 ships were debris floating in space. Not a single human fighter was lost. Sophie did not celebrate. She turned her ship toward home, her face expressionless. There was no joy in this, no satisfaction, only the grim knowledge that this was just the beginning. News of the victory spread through the Galactic Concord like a shockwave. They were supposed to be invincible. Their shields were legendary, the technology that made them the most feared military power in the galaxy. And humanity had cracked them in 2 weeks. High Counselor of the Federation was an ancient being, over 300 years old. He had seen empires rise and fall. He had watched species destroy themselves through war and greed. He thought he had seen everything. But he had never seen anything like this. He sent a private message to Emperor Al. It contained only 4 words, but they carried the weight of centuries of wisdom. "What have you done?" The Emperor read the message and dismissed it. The humans had won one small battle. It meant nothing. His fleets numbered in the thousands. His warriors had been bred for combat for generations. The humans were still soft, still weak, still clinging to their pathetic ideals of peace. He would show them what real war looked like. But deep in the military command, a young officer named looked at the battle reports with growing unease. He had cheered when Meridian 7 burned. He had believed the propaganda about human weakness. Now he was not so sure. The humans had not just won. They had adapted. They had evolved. They had taken a technology that had spent centuries developing and found a counter in 2 weeks. What else were they capable of? Did not know the answer, but he suspected that the galaxy was about to find out. Captain Benjamin Cole had served in the Earth Defense Fleet for 25 years. He had started as a young ensign, eager to explore the stars, and worked his way up through the ranks through dedication and skill. He had never expected to command a warship. The fleet was mostly ceremonial, a symbol of human unity rather than a fighting force. Now he stood on the bridge of the Defiance, the first of the new Vengeance-class carriers. It was the most powerful ship humanity had ever built, a kilometer long and carrying enough firepower to destroy a small moon. 6 months ago, such a ship would have been unthinkable. Now there were 12 of them, with more being built every day. The transformation of human society still amazed Benjamin. He remembered a time when debates about military spending would drag on for years. Now factories ran around the clock, and no one complained. He remembered when the idea of building weapons made people uncomfortable. Now engineers competed to design more effective ones. The sleeping giant had awakened, and it was angry. "Captain," his tactical officer, Lieutenant Amy Shaw, reported from her station, "we are approaching the border territories. Long-range sensors are detecting civilian traffic ahead." Benjamin walked to the main display. The screen showed dozens of small ships fleeing from the border worlds. Transports, cargo vessels, passenger liners. They were running from the war that was coming, trying to get their families to safety. "Can you identify them?" Benjamin asked. Amy worked her console. "Mostly civilians, sir, families by the look of it. Women, children, elderly. They are heading away from the combat zones." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment. He thought about Meridian 7. He thought about the 12 million people who had died there. He thought about the images of children's toys lying in the ashes. They had shown no mercy to human civilians. They had killed them all, every man, woman, and child, leaving only enough survivors to spread fear. Part of him wanted revenge. Part of him wanted to make them feel what humans had felt. An eye for an eye, as the old saying went. They had started this war. They had set the rules. Why should humans follow different ones? But that part of him was not in command. A different part was. "Navigation," Benjamin said, his voice steady. "Plot a course around the civilian corridor. We will not engage non-military targets." Amy looked up from her console, surprise on her face. "Sir, after what they did to us." "After what they did to us," Benjamin agreed. "They crossed a line that we will never cross. That is what makes us different from them. That is what makes us better. We are soldiers, Lieutenant, not murderers. We fight those who can fight back." The bridge was silent for a moment. Then Amy nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Aye, Captain, plotting new course now." The Defiance and its escort ships changed direction, curving around the stream of refugee vessels. On those transports, civilians watched the human warships pass by, too shocked to understand what they were seeing. They had been told humans were savage beasts who would kill anything in their path. They had expected to die. Instead, the humans let them go. Word of what happened spread quickly through the galaxy. The propaganda machine had been working overtime, painting humans as monsters who needed to be stopped before they destroyed everything. Now that narrative was falling apart. Alien news services began reporting on the human policy of protecting civilians. Diplomatic channels buzzed with discussions about the unexpected restraint. On the Emperor Al dismissed the reports as lies. Human tricks, he told his advisors. They are trying to make us look like the villains. It will not work. But in the lower ranks of the military, doubt was spreading. The young officer who had questioned the war from the beginning was not alone anymore. Other soldiers were starting to ask uncomfortable questions. If humans were really the savages the Emperor claimed, why were they sparing lives? If humans were weak and primitive, why were fleets being destroyed one after another? Admiral N, one of the Emperor's most trusted commanders, noticed the growing unrest among his troops. He called to his quarters one evening, wanting to understand what was happening. "You have doubts," and said, "It was not a question." Stood at attention, his forearms pressed against his sides. "Permission to speak freely, Admiral." "Granted." "When we attacked Meridian 7, we killed 12 million civilians. We did not spare anyone. We burned their cities, their farms, their schools. We left children orphaned just so they could tell others what we did." An's expression did not change. "That is war." "Is it?" asked. "Because the humans do not seem to think so. They have had dozens of opportunities to kill our civilians. They have let them all go, every single time." "A trick," An said, echoing the Emperor's words. "They are trying to make us lower our guard." "With respect, Admiral, I do not think so. I have been studying their history. Do you know how they achieved peace on there? They had thousands of years of war, far worse than anything in our history. They killed each other by the millions, invented weapons that could destroy entire cities in an instant. And then they stopped. They chose to stop. They built a peaceful civilization not because they forgot how to fight, but because they decided not to." And was silent, considering this. "We poked a sleeping predator," continued. "We thought they were prey because they acted like prey, but they were not prey, Admiral. They were predators who had learned to control themselves, and we just reminded them what they are capable of." The Admiral stared at the young officer for a long time. Then he turned away, looking out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, human fleets were advancing, destroying everything the sent against them while carefully protecting civilians on both sides. "What would you have me do?" An asked quietly. "I do not know, Admiral, but I know this. If we continue on this path, we will lose. Not just the war, but everything. The humans are showing the galaxy who they really are. We are showing the galaxy who we really are. And right now, we do not look good." Meanwhile, on Earth, President Maria Santos addressed the people. She stood in front of the memorial being built for Meridian 7, construction equipment working behind her, the names of the dead being carved into stone. "I have heard some voices calling for us to abandon our principles," she said. "They say we should treat them the way they treated us. They say we should make them suffer the way our people suffered. I understand that anger. I feel it too." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the crowd. "But we will not become monsters to defeat monsters. We will win this war not by being as brutal as our enemies, but by being better than them. Every civilian we spare is a testament to who we are. Every act of mercy is a message to the galaxy that humanity fights for a reason, not just for revenge." The crowd was silent, listening. "We will make them pay for what they did, but we will do it our way, with honor and restraint. And when this war is over, we will be able to look ourselves in the mirror. That is worth more than any victory." 6 months had passed since the massacre at Meridian 7. 6 months of war, of battles, of destruction. The Empire, once the most feared military power in the galaxy, was crumbling. Their fleets had been decimated. Their border worlds had fallen one by one. Their allies had abandoned them, unwilling to stand against the tide of human vengeance. And now the human fleet had arrived at Prime. 300 warships hung in orbit around them. They represented every nation on Earth, united in purpose for the first time in human history. The carriers' defiance, retribution, and justice led the formation, their weapons powered and ready. Behind them came cruisers, destroyers, frigates, and thousands of fighters, a wall of steel and fire that blocked out the stars. On the surface below, 8 billion looked up at the sky and saw their doom. Emperor Al sat on his throne in the imperial palace, surrounded by the last of his advisors. The great hall, once filled with the sounds of celebration and triumph, was silent now. The giant screens that usually displayed victories showed only the human fleet, growing larger with each passing hour. "The planetary defense grid," the emperor asked. "Destroyed, Your Majesty," an advisor answered, his voice trembling. "The humans dismantled it over the last 3 weeks. Surgical strikes, impossible to counter. They targeted only military installations, leaving civilian infrastructure untouched. Our remaining fleet. Scattered, most commanders have fled to the outer territories. Those who stayed are demanding we surrender." Al gripped the arms of his throne so hard that the metal bent beneath his fingers. 6 months ago, he had been the ruler of an empire that stretched across 100 star systems. He had commanded the most powerful military the galaxy had ever seen. He had looked at humanity and seen nothing but prey. Now his empire was in ruins. His military was destroyed, and his people were at the mercy of the very species he had tried to exterminate. "They will destroy us," he said quietly, "just as we destroyed them." A communication alert sounded. An advisor stepped forward nervously. "Your Majesty, the humans are transmitting. They wish to speak with you." The emperor stared at the screen for a long moment. Part of him wanted to refuse, to maintain some shred of dignity in defeat. But what was the point? He had already lost everything. "Put them through." The main screen flickered and a human face appeared. It was President Maria Santos. She looked older than she had 6 months ago, with new lines around her eyes and streaks in her dark hair. But her gaze was steady and her voice was calm. "Emperor Al," she began, "your fleets are destroyed. Your defenses are gone. Your allies have abandoned you. We could end your civilization in a matter of hours. Every military strategist in the galaxy expected us to do exactly that." The emperor waited for the threat, for the demand for unconditional surrender, for the announcement of his planet's imminent destruction. "But that is not who we are." Al blinked, uncertain he had heard correctly. "We did not come to the stars to become monsters," President Santos continued. "We came seeking knowledge, friendship, and wonder. Your attack on Meridian 7 nearly broke us. It awakened something dark in our species, something we have spent centuries learning to control. We wanted revenge. We wanted to make you suffer the way our people suffered. We wanted to burn your worlds the way you burned ours." She paused, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Pain, perhaps, or grief. "But we will not let that darkness define us. We choose who we are, Emperor. Every day, with every decision, we choose, and we choose not to be you." On the bridge of the Defiance, Captain Benjamin Cole watched the transmission alongside his crew. Lieutenant Amy Shaw had tears streaming down her face. Other officers stood in stunned silence, hardly daring to breathe. "We are here to deliver a message," President Santos continued. "Not of destruction, but of warning. Humanity will not forget what you did to our people. We will carry that wound for generations. But we will not let that wound turn us into something we despise." The screen behind her changed, showing a list of terms. "You will dismantle your military. You will pay reparations to the families of Meridian 7 for the next century. You will submit to Galactic Conquered oversight for the next 100 years. You will hand over all officers responsible for ordering the massacre to stand trial for crimes against sentient beings. And you will remember, for as long as your species exists, what happens when you mistake human kindness for weakness." Emperor Al stared at the screen, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. They had won. The humans had won completely and utterly. They could wipe out his entire species with the press of a button, and instead of destruction, they were offering mercy. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We killed millions of your people. We burned your colony to ash. We left your children as orphans. Why would you spare us?" President Santos was quiet for a moment. When she answered, her voice was soft but carried clearly through the transmission. "Because killing millions of your people would not bring ours back. It would only prove that we are no better than you. And we are better than you, Emperor. Never forget that." The transmission ended. The screen went dark. In the Imperial Palace, Emperor Al sat in silence. His advisors looked at each other, afraid to speak, afraid to move. The most powerful being in the empire had been reduced to nothing more than a defeated old man, sitting alone on a throne that no longer meant anything. In orbit above, the human fleet waited. They could have fired at any moment. They could have turned Prime into a burning wasteland, just as they had done to Meridian 7. Every soldier in that fleet had a reason to want revenge. Many of them had lost friends, family, loved ones in the massacre. But they held their fire, they waited. And slowly, reluctantly, Emperor Al raised his head and spoke the words that ended the war. "We accept your terms." Across the galaxy, species that had watched the conflict unfold sat in stunned silence. They had expected the humans to destroy them. It was what any other species would have done. It was what they themselves would have done if the situation had been reversed. Instead, humanity had shown the galaxy something unexpected, something that would reshape interstellar politics for centuries to come. True strength was not about the ability to destroy your enemies. True strength was about the ability to choose not to destroy them, even when you had every right to do so. The humans had proven they were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and then they had proven they were also the most merciful. It was a lesson the galaxy would never forget. 10 years had passed since the end of the war. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Old alliances had shifted, new ones had formed, and at the center of it all stood humanity, no longer the gentle diplomats they had once been, but something far more complex. The memorial at New Meridian was finally complete. It had taken 5 years to build, a massive spire of white stone that rose 300 meters into the sky. Every name of the 12 million dead was carved into its surface, a permanent reminder of what had been lost. At its base was a garden filled with flowers from 100 different worlds, tended by volunteers who came from across the galaxy to pay their respects. Admiral Porter, now 73 years old and long retired, walked through the garden with his granddaughter. Her name was Lucy, and she was 8 years old, with bright eyes and a curious mind. She was the same age his own daughter had been when she died on Meridian 7. "Grandpa," Lucy asked, looking up at the towering memorial, "why did we let them live? After what they did, I mean. My teacher says they were really bad." Stopped walking and knelt down so he could look his granddaughter in the eye. The question was simple, asked with the innocence of a child, but the answer was anything but simple. "Some of them were bad," he said carefully. "The ones who gave the order to attack, the ones who carried it out, they did terrible things. But there were also who had nothing to do with the attack. Children like you, who were just living their lives. Parents who were just trying to take care of their families. Old people who had never held a weapon in their entire lives. Would it have been right to kill them for something they did not do?" Lucy thought about this for a moment. "No," she said slowly, "that would not be fair." "Exactly. That is the thing about war, sweetheart. It is messy. The bad people hide behind the good people, and sometimes it is very hard to tell the difference. What makes us human is that we try anyway. We try to protect the innocent, even when it would be easier not to." "But they hurt us first," Lucy said. "Is that not a reason to hurt them back?" Smiled sadly. "It is a reason, a very good reason, but being strong enough to hurt someone is easy. Being strong enough to stop when you have every reason to keep going, that is hard. That is what makes us human. Lucy nodded slowly, still not entirely understanding, but accepting her grandfather's words. They continued walking through the garden, past flowers of every color, past benches where people sat quietly remembering those they had lost. On the other side of the memorial, a group of young students stood in a cluster, listening to their teacher. She was an elderly female named, and she had dedicated her life to building bridges between humans, and her father had been the young officer who questioned the war so many years ago. After the conflict ended, he had spent the rest of his life working for reconciliation. When he died, his daughter had taken up his mission. The humans could have destroyed us, told her students, her voice carrying the weight of history. They had every right to. We killed 12 million of their people for no reason other than to prove our dominance. We thought they were weak because they preferred peace over war. We thought they were prey because they did not act like predators. The students listened in silence, their black eyes fixed on their teacher. We were wrong. The humans showed us something we had never understood. True strength is not about destroying your enemies. True strength is about choosing not to destroy them, even when you have the power to do so. The humans had that power. They had earned that power through blood and sacrifice, and they chose mercy. One of the students raised a hand. Teacher, do you think they made the right choice? Would it not have been safer to eliminate us completely? Considered the question carefully. Perhaps. Many humans argued for exactly that. They said we could not be trusted, that we would rebuild our military and attack again. But President Santos and the others believed something different. They believed that people could change. That entire species could change if given the chance. And were they right? The teacher smiled. Look around you. You are standing on human soil in a memorial to human dead, and no one is trying to hurt you. Humans and work together now, live together, learn from each other. Is that not proof enough? In the galactic conquered chambers, humanity's reputation had been transformed. They were no longer seen as the naive diplomats who tried to negotiate with everyone. They were seen as something far more nuanced, a species capable of terrible violence who actively chose peace. Other alien races watched them with a mixture of respect and wariness. The humans smiled and talked and traded, but everyone remembered what happened when they stopped smiling. The memorial ceremony began as the sun set over New Meridian. Thousands of people gathered, humans and aliens alike, to remember those who had died and to celebrate the peace that had followed. President Santos, now retired, gave the keynote speech. Her hair had turned completely, and she walked with a cane, but her voice was still strong. 12 million souls, she said, looking out over the crowd. That is what we lost on this world 10 years ago. Farmers, teachers, children, artists, people who had done nothing wrong except live on a planet that someone else wanted. Their deaths changed us. They awakened something in humanity that we had worked for centuries to put to sleep. She paused, letting the words sink in. But their deaths also reminded us who we wanted to be. We could have become monsters. We could have repaid atrocity with atrocity, massacre with massacre. Some days, I still wish we had. Some days, the anger is still so strong that I can barely breathe. She looked toward the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. But then I remember the 47 children who survived. I remember their faces when we told them they were safe. I remember the look in their eyes when they asked if we were going to hurt them the way they had hurt them. And I remember what we told them. President Santos turned back to the crowd, her eyes sweeping across thousands of faces, human and alien. We told them no. We told them that we were better than that. And we proved it, not by being weak, but by being strong enough to choose mercy when vengeance would have been so much easier. She gestured toward the memorial, its white stone glowing in the fading light. This monument is not just a reminder of what we lost. It is a promise of what we will always be. a species that fights when it has to, that protects its own with everything it has, but that never, ever forgets the value of a single life. That is our legacy. That is humanity. The crowd was silent as she finished speaking. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Others joined in, humans and aliens together, applauding not just the speech but the idea behind it. Porter held his granddaughter's hand as the applause washed over them. Somewhere in the crowd, he knew, were former enemies who had become friends, former soldiers who had found peace, and children who would never know war. It was not a perfect galaxy. It never would be. There would always be conflicts, always be disagreements, always be those who chose violence over dialogue. But humanity had shown that another way was possible, that strength and mercy could coexist, that the choice to spare an enemy was just as powerful as the ability to destroy them. And that lesson, carved in white stone and written in the stars, would endure long after everyone present that day had returned to dust. The memorial stood in silence as the crowd dispersed, a beacon of hope in the darkness of space, reminding the galaxy of what humanity had lost, what they had become, and what they had chosen to be. It was, perhaps, the greatest victory of all.